Hello, and welcome to this next video. In our Genesis series, we're going to be looking at a section that we already looked at, but we're going to look at it with more focus and more detail today. And that's Genesis chapter 10, verses 2 through 5. I decided I'm going to split this up into 4 sections. The previous one, which was Genesis 10, the whole chapter, and that was just giving an overview of the concept of the table of nations, the 70 nations that we see in Genesis chapter 10. And now we're going to break it down and look in a little bit more depth, a little bit more detail of each of the 3 sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And it lists Japheth first in Genesis 10, 2 through 5. So we're going to look at his today and give a little bit of background and some interesting insights. Keep in mind that if you want to trace your own genealogy back to Genesis 10 and the Table of Nations, the book that I was holding up at the beginning of this video, traced by Dr. Nathaniel Jensen, and he has a lot of videos. If you just search on traced Jensen, you'll find a ton of videos from Answers in Genesis, and it's very compelling new information that we have to go by, that he has done a lot of research on the migration patterns of ancient civilizations, and he's coupled it with the DNA research of a large group of Y chromosome DNA research that has traced people who are alive today back to their ancient roots. And so it's really fascinating to see, because you might think, oh, well, I'm a particular from a particular family group, or as they might say, racial group, and so I've always believed that I'm from Japheth because of that, or I believe that I'm from Ham because of that, or I believe I'm from Seth because of that. Shem, I'm sorry, because of that. And so you might think of all of these things just because of your basic background and what you know about, anyway, what you might know about your genealogical background. But what's amazing is the research that he's done with all the maps in his books has shown that because of the migration patterns and because of the intermingling of these different family groups at different times, you could actually think that you're from Japheth and be from Shem, or you might think that you're from Ham but you're from Shem, or you might think that you're from Shem and actually be from Japheth or Ham. And so it's really interesting. Some of his stuff is somewhat speculative, but he has a lot of data and a lot of research to back it up. And if you do end up getting your Y chromosome DNA tested, and you can go reference it in his book, and you can see, E1b or R1b or R1a, or the different haplogroups that we talked about last time. It's really fascinating to think about that you could actually look back and trace your lineage biblically back through your Y chromosome DNA and see what family group that you actually came from, and have a very high chance of actually really getting it down and nailing it down pretty concretely. And so we're not going to do that today. We already did that in the last video. If you're interested in that, go check it out. It was our Genesis chapter 10 video, the one before this one. But now we're going to look at more historical records that have been around for thousands of years. This is actually, a lot of what we're going to look at today comes from Josephus, who at the time of Christ, a little bit after the time of Christ actually, during the time of the Apostles and the book of Acts, Josephus, he was a Jew, but he was more of a secular Jew, and he was essentially a very interesting figure. But long story short, he was compelled to actually write a history of the Jews, which is now a famous work known as the Antiquity of the Jews. He's widely regarded as an excellent historian and a very top-notch historian. And one of the things that he did was he linked the table of nations that we have in the book of Genesis chapter 10, and he linked it to the people groups that were living at the time of his life. And so he, at the time of when he lived, there was people, for instance, called the Galatians. And we know that Paul writes a letter to the Galatians. Well, in Paul's letter to the Galatians, one of the things we find out is that that was a people group, the Galatians, who lived in a certain part of what we now call Turkey, which back then was known as Asia Minor. And that particular group, Josephus says, came from this particular descendant of Japheth. And so he's linking that people group back to Genesis 10. And he does that for most of the names that are listed in Genesis 10. Some of them, he says, they've fallen out of record. We don't know what happened to them. There's no records. We don't know, some of these groups have kind of disappeared from history, at least from his knowledge. It's not necessarily true that that happened, but as far as he knew at the time. But many of the groups he does identify, and it's pretty fascinating. So we're going to take Japheth today. And so we're just going to pick up from Genesis 10:2, and we're going to do this in 3 sections. So today's section will be Genesis 10:2 through Genesis 10:5. This is the genealogy of Japheth, one of Noah's sons. And then next time we'll take Ham, and that's going to be Genesis 10:6 all the way through Genesis 10:20. And then we'll do our last group, Shem, Genesis 10:21 to the end of the chapter. And so let's start today. Let's just read it real quick and take a look. Okay, so the sons of Japheth were Gomer and Magog and Madai and Javan and Tubal and Meshech and Tiras. And the sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. And the sons of Javan, Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. And from these, the coastlines of the nations were separated into their lands, everyone after his language, according to their families, into their nations. Okay, so if you see me not reading it word for word here, what you see here is because I memorized this in a different translation a long time ago. So when we have this, we're just going to be looking at these names here. And what does this mean? Gomer and Magog and Madai and Javan and Tubal and Meshech and Tiras. These are the 7 sons of Japheth. Now, if you remember in our last video, if you look at just the direct sons, not the grandsons, the sons only, the sons and only the sons of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, you will see that there's 16 of them. And that's very interesting because there's a debate about this, and you can kind of look at the root groups, the haplogroups of the DNA tree, and roughly, I'm just going to say roughly, but roughly speaking, there's about 16 primary haplogroups. Well, that's interesting, because there's 16 sons that came from Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And so it does kind of correlate. I think more research needs to be done on that. But then, from the grandsons, that branches off from there. And of course, then there's mingling between different groups at different times before they kind of go into their region, and after Babylon, they kind of go into their various regions and they settle in certain areas, and then those particular family groups become very dominant in their traits, be it their height or their facial features or their skin tone or whatever else it might be. It's later on that the dominant traits of different family groups becomes very prominent as they intermarry within the tribe for many, many, many generations, and then those dominant traits start to bear out. So anyway, we're going to be relying heavily on Josephus's work today, and so there's different websites where you can get this. It's free. I just picked this one because it's actually just the Antiquity of the Jews that Josephus wrote. I believe this is in volume 6, I believe, and it's or 1, okay, 1, 6, 1, 6, 1 through 5. And so this is the Table of Nations, as according to Josephus, his commentary on it. And he tells us who all these people were. And then I have another one from Answers in Genesis up that kind of breaks it down for us and gives us a little bit more insight into what all this means. Okay, and we're going to look at a few other websites just as I have prepared here for you. Okay, so these are the grandchildren of Noah, in honor of whom names were imposed on the nations by those that first seized upon them. Japheth, the son of Noah, had 7 sons. Okay, so this is not scripture. This is Josephus in his commentary on Genesis 10, 2 through 5. Okay, so, and he says, inhabited, so that beginning at the mountain Taurus, that's the Tarsus mountains, which are basically in Turkey, and Amanus, they proceeded along Asia, so that would be like Asia Minor, that would be like Turkey, as far as the river Tanais, and along Europe to Cadiz, and settling themselves on the land which they light upon, which none had inhabited before. And so he's basically saying these tribes from Japheth, they kind of move into this area, starting from the Turkish region, and then branching off westward through Europe. Okay, so they called the nations by their own names. For Gomer, so that's kind of, we all understand that, right? It's like the patriarch of a nation. Jacob, as a matter of fact, is the very obvious one. He has his name changed to Israel, and now the nation of Israel is called by the patriarch of that nation, Israel. Makes sense. Okay, so same thing applies here that we're looking at with this. So Magog, or I'm sorry, let's go back. Let's start with Gomer. Sorry, Gomer founded those whom the Greeks now call Galatians, the Gauls. Okay, where were these people living? In Turkey. So you kind of almost get a sense that he's the eldest, Gomer, and so he's there. And the very first land he finds is, from where they came from the Ark, and then after Babylon, you can just kind of get a sense that, okay, I'm here, I found this land, I'm the oldest, so I'm going to start right here. And you could tell that his brothers were kind of the ones that started going more westward. So he started there in Turkey and kind of settled and dwelt there in Turkey. And there's a connection with Gomer, of course, to Germany as well. But it starts there in Turkey, also known as Anatolia, and we'll see that in a minute. Okay, but were then called Gomerites. So in other words, in the past, they were called Gomerites, but as time went on, they became called Gauls or Galatians, and they mostly were settling there in that particular region of Turkey. Okay, and then it says, and Magog founded those that from him were Magogites, but who are by the Greeks called Scythians. And so we know this people. The Scythians are the ones who went north and went north of Turkey up into what's now Russia. And so we know that Magog is Russia. And so we know by that in Ezekiel 38 and 39, for instance, that's going to be the place where the Gog-Magog war originates from. Okay, now as to Javan and Madai, the sons of Japheth, okay, we get from Madai came the Medians, who are called Medes by the Greeks. So this is when we see the Medo-Persian Empire. They came from Madai, the third son of Japheth. And then from Javan, Ionia, and what's that? That's Greece. That's the whole Macedonian area, the Grecian area. They're all derived from Javan. He's Greece. And that's even in Scripture, it tells us that. And we know that without a doubt for a fact. Okay, so Tubal, or here called Thobal, founded the Thobalites, who are now called Iberis. Okay, this is the Iberian Peninsula. This is like Spain, the area that's now Spain and Portugal, that's right here, the Iberians. And so he founded that area. And the Mosokeni were founded by Mosak or Meshek. Okay, that's also called Meshek. Now they are Cappadocians. That's another region or area, a different region within Turkey. Okay, so Turkey's a big place. It's a large body of land, and so there were some regions where it's more on the eastern side of Turkey, which is this one, and then there's some more on the western side of Turkey, which is the one we already talked about. Okay, so there's also a mark of the ancient denomination still to be shown, for there is even now some among them a city called Mazaka, which may inform those that are able to understand that so was the entire nation once called. Okay, Tyrus, or Thyrus, also called those whom he ruled over Thracians, but the Greeks changed the name into the Thracians, or Thrace. Okay, so we can see that in a moment. And so many were the countries that had the children of Japheth for their inhabitants. Of the 3 sons of Gomer, okay, so now we're getting into the 3 sons of Gomer. Ashkenaz, here spelled with an X, founded the Ashkenazians, who were now called by the Greeks Rhenians, Rhine, and this is like the Rhine River in Germany. This is speaking of the area of Germany, but of course, it's gone by many names down through the centuries, because at one time it was Prussia in a larger area, and then when it was originally founded, though, it was founded by Ashkenaz, who is a son of Gomer, and this becomes the region and the people of Germany. So did Ripvath found the Riphians, now called Paphlagonians, and Thrugrama, the Thrugramians, who, as the Greeks resolved, were named Phrygians. Of the 3 sons of Javan, also the son of Japheth, Elisha gave name to the Eliasins, who were his subjects. They are now the Aeolians. Very interesting. Okay, so for those interested in music theory, you'll note Phrygian, Aeolian. Those are all different types of scales with different types of intervals between the notes, but it all came from that area. These are names, geographic names of people groups in that area. Okay, Tharsis to the Tharsians, for so was Cilicia of old called. The sign which of this is the noblest city they have, and a metropolis also is Tarsus, the tau being by change put for theta. Okay, so it goes on. Sethimus possessed the island Kithima. It is now called Cyprus. Okay, and from that, it is all the islands, and the greatest part of the seacoasts are named Sethim by the Hebrews, and one city there, Cyprus, has been able to preserve its denomination. It is called Citius by those who use the language of the Greeks, and has not by the use of dialect escaped the name of Sethim. And so many nations have the children and grandchildren of Japheth possessed. Okay, so he's basically saying, like, because of dialects and languages and different aspects to these names, it's these people are now called this, but they used to be called that. And he tries to kind of preserve that for us so that we know this came from this group came from that, and so on. Now that's the translated into English. That's kind of if you get Josephus's Antiquity of the Jews and you go read this section, that's that. So this article, which is written. Let me see. Let me get the name and just give credit here where credit is due. And Bodhi Hodge, okay, did a great article here, which basically breaks down for us Josephus's work. and makes it a little bit more easy to follow those different names that I was butchering, trying to pronounce. Okay, so this is the same basically that we just read. Japheth had 7 sons. They inhabited the beginning of the Taurus and Amanus, etc. Okay, so now, but now this article, he kind of breaks it down for us and says Gomer founded those whom the Greeks now called Galatians, but they were then called Gomerites. Okay, we already went over that. So notice this Magog founded those who from him were named Magogites, but who are by the Greeks called Scythians, Russia. Again, Javan and Madai, the Medians, who are called the Medes. We're going to look at them in a minute. But Javan, Ionia, and the Greeks. Now, Tubal, who in Josephus' work is called Thobal, the Thobalites, who are now called Iberus. Again, that's the area of that Iberian Peninsula. And the Mosochini were founded by Meshech. We call it Meshech. That's how it's spelled in most English Bibles now, Meshech. They are the Cappadocians. There's also a mark of their ancient name. Okay, we already read that. Okay, now, Tyrus also called those whom he ruled over Thracians, but the Greeks changed the name into Thracians. And so if you take a look at some of these things, for instance, Cappadocia, you can see it's this region here in Turkey, okay, and it's mostly here on the eastern area there, and I think I have another aspect of that. I thought I had something else up here ready to go with that. Oh, there it is. Okay, so you can see this is let's just take a look. So that's that. Cappadocia is kind of that eastern area of Turkey, and you saw some of those other ones that we were reading about. Like right here, you can see Paphlagonia and Pamphylia and some of those other ones that were mentioned. It's kind of right all there, like all around Turkey. It's kind of like, think of how big this geographical area is, and then you kind of think, okay, well, this son settled here and kind of took this region, and one settled here, and one settled here, and one settled here. But then eventually they started kind of branching off and going off into the other lands, making it into Greece, Macedonia. You see Ionia kind of right there on the eastern side of the Grecian geography there. And so you can kind of get a picture of how things started and how things started to spread out little by little. Okay, so with that, let's take a look at, this is a really interesting article by Jack Kelly. Chuck Missler made reference to this concept and the return, he calls this the return of the Medes. So there is a belief by many, including myself, that the Medes carry on to this day, and just like Iran is kind of is Persia, ancient Persia, the Medo-Persian Empire, but the Medes kind of lost their geography. However, they are still a people group, and they settled primarily in that little area right there that we all know about because of the Iraq War in the 90s, in Kuwait. And the Kurds, whom we call today the Kurds, there's a very strong link between the Kurds of today and the Medes of old. And that's what this article is all about, the return of the Medes, because there's prophecy that this group, the Medes, is going to actually come back and war against Babylon. And so if you take the Bible seriously, which I do, people try to allegorize it and say, oh, well, it really just meant that time when the Medo-Persian Empire took over Babylon. Well, but the scripture says they're going to destroy Babylon. They didn't destroy it. They just took it over. So if you've studied it, you know that Cyrus comes, and by stealth, he just diverts the river, comes in, they kill the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, but they don't destroy the city. They just take over. It's just basically like under new management. And so there's a very specific scripture in some of these passages he cites here, like Isaiah 13 and going on. He cites a whole bunch of other scriptures here, but I'm not going to read them. But Isaiah 13 pointing to 13 and 14, and Jeremiah 15:51. It's also in Revelation 17 and 18. You'll see that there's language that indicates the Medes are actually going to literally and physically destroy this area, this city of Babylon. And it has been rebuilt. It was largely rebuilt by Saddam Hussein during that time. And it's still there. It's like a kind of a tourist trap now, but it's this giant complex of basically ancient Babylon. And so if you take a look at it, this article is basically talking about that very concept here. Let me see if I can get to the takeaway from this commentary. Through the Kurds, the Medes have stepped out of history and onto the world stage once again, and another player in the end-time scenario is taking its place. One day soon, the king of the Medes will again lead a vast army against Babylon, and her time of destruction will be complete, and the Lord's words will be fulfilled. You can almost hear the footsteps of the Messiah. And so, all the stuff in the Middle East, there's all kinds of things. There's actually still Assyrians, and they're kind of couched within these other nations and these little factions and these little groups. But like the Kurds and the Assyrians, all these end times players, they're going to take shape again. Both before, I think they're starting to take shape. It's starting to take shape more and more, both before the rapture and then after the rapture, when everything explodes essentially after that. All this stuff is going to come back into very sharp focus as the end time scenario plays out. Here's, the Iberians, we were talking about them. And so you could see that peninsula of the Iberian Peninsula there, and where they all settled. And then Thrace, that's that other one. So this is that kind of that area which is a little bit northeast of Greece, and it's kind of in the area where we would say Romania, Bulgaria, on this side of Turkey, right? So you can see that one. And so this is the area that all of these regions were where all of these sons of Japheth came and settled. And so you can read about it, and you could see again here it says, this is where it kind of makes it easier for us. Of the three sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz founded the Ashkenazians. So I always remember that because of right there. And so you could see Germany, and who are now called by the Greeks Rhenians. And that's like the Rhine River. And so in Rhineland, it's called Rhineland, where Germany is. And so did Riphas found the Ripasians, now called the Paphlagoians. You saw that on the map earlier. And Togarma, the Togarmans, who, as the Greeks resolved, were named Phrygians. So that's another area that we talked about there in the Turkey area. Of the three sons of Javan, also the sons of Japheth, Elisha gave names to Elisans, who were his subjects, now called the Aeolians, and Tarshish, the Tarshians. So, for so was Cilicia of old called, the sign of which is the noblest city which they have. The metropolis also is Tarsus, the tau being change put for theta. Now here's an interesting one. The Kitimus or Kitim possessed the island Kitima. It is now called Cyprus. This is Rome. Okay, so the people who came to be the Roman Empire came from Kittim, from Cyprus, the island there, Cyprus, into Italy. And so it started here, though. This is Rome, known in biblical prophecy to be Rome, and the patriarch of Rome, and Cyprus and Italy and all that region. And of course, all the islands and the seacoasts are named Kithim by the Hebrews. And so that, I think, pretty much gives you an idea of how all of these areas and regions got settled and dwelt by these sons of Japheth. Again, it's the direct sons are Gomer and Magog and Madai and Javan and Tubal and Meshech and Tiras. And then two in particular, Gomer here and Javan here, have additional sons. Not that Tubal and Meshech and Tiras didn't, but it brings out that Gomer had particularly these sons, Ashkenaz, Japheth, and Togarmah, which became prominent over different areas of that Turkish region and eastern, and then moving further and further west into Europe. And so also Javan, of course, who's the patriarch of Greece and Macedonia, he has these four sons, Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim, from which come, many, including myself, believe that Tarshish right here is representing Great Britain, England, essentially. Kittim is Italy. And then these two, just go back in the video and you could see the ones that we went over there. And so, that's, again, Germany, and some of these others are kind of like Romania. And then you don't have a perfect one-to-one match of this country from this person, because since they settled in those various regions, multiple nations kind of broke off from there. So a good way I like to think of it is, there's 70 nations in the table of nations. And now I kind of like to think about it like this. In the world today, there's something like 190 some odd nations, almost 210 nations. And why do I say 210? Well, because 70 times 3 is 210. So if you think of every nation from the table of nations kind of split into 3, and 70 times 3 is 210, and we today have almost 210 different nations recognized in the world. Not quite, but I mean, at different times, different groups. And so you can kind of just use that as a rough guide to get an idea that roughly at that point, as the eras in history went on, migration patterns happened, and different people groups went different places. It built out from there and became the different nations that we have today. But just like you could go, we're going to do Ham next time. And so we'll go look at Ham and see that Middle Eastern region, and then Northern Africa, and those regions where it's spread out. And like, for example, the Nubian Empire, that covered parts of what's now modern day Ethiopia, but also Sudan. So you have Ethiopia and Sudan. In the past, it was just one big giant kingdom, but it got separated into different smaller chunks, like the Ethiopian area and the Sudan area and so on. So it used to be just like one people group, but then they split up into multiple nations. Exactly the same concept. We saw earlier in this video how it was kind of like Bulgaria and Romania. There starts with one group and then it splits off, and then there's some splitting off from there that happens. And so we end up with not 70 nations, but almost 200 nations in the world today, because each group has kind of done some splitting since then. And of course, there's all the migration patterns and everything else that comes to bear in that. So anyway, really interesting stuff. It's more historical. Of course, we could get into some prophetic stuff, because all these are major players. Gomer is a major player in the end times, and especially Magog, major player. The Medes are a major player in Isaiah 13 and 14 in the end times. And of course, prophetically speaking, Greece, obviously, and Turkey and Germany. All these are major players in the end times. And then when we get into Ham, we have some other major players in the end times. Mitzrayim is Egypt. We'll talk about that next time. Put is Libya, major player in the end times. And then, Sheba and Dedan, Saudi Arabia, major player in the end times. And Cush and Sudan, major player in the end times. So they're historical, and it's interesting to kind of see the history and the migration patterns and the genealogical records and the DNA that Dr. Jensen's brought out in his book, and how it all fits together. But then it also is prophetic, because all of these nations have a kind of a culmination point and where they fit in the end time scenario, with the Gog-Magog war, with the destruction of Babylon during the 7-year tribulation, during all those different prophetic events that are still yet future. These have a historical aspect, but they also have a prophetic destiny aspect. And so it's interesting to study. I hope you're enjoying it. We're gonna do 2 more, one on Ham next time, next week, hopefully, Lord willing, and then the week after we'll do Shem, and we will kind of do the same thing we did today for Japheth. We'll do it for Ham, and then for Shem, basically just the order in which it's in the Bible, and then we'll move on to Genesis 11 after that, getting into the Tower of Babel, and kind of get back to more of our normal verse-by-verse Bible teaching through Genesis here after that. So anyway, like I said, hope you're enjoying these videos, hope you're enjoying the studies, and we will see you here, there, in the air, or in the next video. God bless you.